view of Sigurd Neubauer now in Washington, D.C., whose areas of expertise include Middle East politics. Thank you very much for joining us on the News Grid. There was a lot of hope indeed from human rights groups after Spain's government decided to stop its 2015 arms deal with Saudi Arabia. Now they say they will go ahead with the sale of these 400 laser-guided bombs to the Saudis. What do you make of this U-turn, especially when it comes just a day after the Trump administration certified that Saudi Arabia and the UAE are doing enough to minimize the deadly impact of their military campaign in Yemen?
What we're seeing is that we're seeing increasing pressure around the world, including in Spain, the United States, Germany, Britain, and even Norway, to cease all military sales to Yemen, to Saudi Arabia, and to the United Arab Emirates for their operations in Yemen. Having said that, we're also seeing that there's a concerted effort led by the United States to push forward the peace process for Yemen. As we have seen in previous reportings just these past couple of days, the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffin, has just traveled throughout the Gulf to set the stage for the next push for UN peace talks. We have also seen that the Houthis have said that they have been denied access to traveling to Geneva for the peace talks.
Right.
And the Saudis, for their part, have accused the Houthis of not showing up. So there is a gap there between the two narratives.
Yeah, you say there's a lot of pressure on these Western governments to perhaps review their support for the Saudi-led coalition, but it doesn't seem to have had an effect. I mean, with Spain today reversing this decision to stop this arms deal with Saudi Arabia, what's the best way, in your view, to influence these Western governments, the U.S. and others, to perhaps influence them more in telling the Saudi-led coalition to reduce the number of civilian casualties in Yemen? What actions should they take?
Well, what we are seeing is we are seeing concerted actions. So, for instance, when the United States Secretary of Defense declared last week that U.S. support for the war in Yemen, even though it's minimal, is unconditional, and the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, issuing yesterday in a statement that the UAE and Saudi are barely meeting the requirements needed to avoid all sorts of civilian casualties. These are diplomatic messages that are put forward, and the conditions
diplomatic
for
messages, but they don't seem to have any impact on the ground. I mean, we're still seeing civilian casualties in Yemen. The battle for data is intensifying.
No. This is. I disagree with what you just suggested, because the United States could have withheld all support for Saudi Arabia and Yemen unless they are paving the way for UN peace talks. And what we're seeing now is that we're seeing the discussions beginning to take place of bringing the Houthi leadership and the Saudi coalition for peace talks in Yemen. So all of this look messy at the moment, but this is very much tied to the United States using military pressure to force the Saudis and Emiratis to make the concessions that they need so that peace talks can take place.
When you talk about the U.S. military, the U.S. using military pressure on the Saudi-led coalition, what sort of pressure exactly? Nothing has really changed, has it? I mean, they're still continuing their arms sales to the Saudi-led coalition, are they not?
At the bare minimum, you might have seen that just yesterday there was an outcry in the U.S. Congress, including in the Senate and the House of Representatives, where leaders from both parties were pressuring the administration to move forward. That message has been understood in Abu Dhabi and in Riyadh, and therefore what we're seeing now is that the UN Special Envoy is now in the region to try to coax all the parties so that these talks can take place, and the United States is clearly using that as leverage. At the same time, the relationship between the United States and its partners in the Gulf are strategic, even though there are significant differences with the deadly toll that the war has taken on civilians across the country. And the United States now is signaling that this will no longer be tolerated. And I think this message has gotten across to Abu Dhabi and to Riyadh.
Okay, thank you for sharing your views with us. Sigurd Neubauer, Middle East analyst, joining us from Washington. Thank you for your time. Now, the war in